Madam Chairman, thank you for scheduling this hearing today on 1054, which will allow 41 hunters with legally taken polar bear trophies in Canada to import their trophies into the U.S. after paying the required permit fee, which is approximately $1,000 per bear. The intent of this bill is very specific, to allow only those 41 hunters with legally taken polar bear trophies taken prior to May 15, 2008 listing to bring those trophies into the United States. Congress amended the Marine Mammal Protection Act in 1994 to allow U.S. hunters to import polar bear trophies from Canada. We did that. This committee did it. The act requires the Fish and Wildlife Service to review the status of polar bear populations in Canada, and after conducting the review, to create a list of approved stable and healthy polar bear populations. Following this process, U.S. hunters would only be allowed to import trophies from those approved populations. 13 of the 19 polar bear populations are under the jurisdiction of Canada. Canada has one of the best management programs using state-of-the-art scientific practices to manage its populations. Out of those 13 populations, only 6 are considered to be approved population by the Fish and Wildlife Service. The worldwide population of polar bears, Madam Chairman, is currently estimated at 23,000 bears. I have a press release from the 1970s where the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is heralding the stability of polar bear population with an estimate of 20,000 bears. That was 1970. Now we have 23,000. Here we are 32 years later, and the population is still above the 20,000 polar bears. Given the dire prediction for polar bears over the next 100 years, one might be surprised that the polar bear has weathered other warming trends, including the most recent one in the last 50 years. Instead of seeing a huge decline in population, it is, as is predicted by the population of the next 100 years, the polar bear population has stayed stable since 1970. I do not want to digress into reasons why the Endangered Species Act listing of the polar bear was wrong. It's not the focus of this hearing. However, I do want to stress that the prohibition of bringing these trophies in the U.S. is not providing any conservation value to the Canadian polar bear population. In fact, if we allow these trophies to be imported, we can raise much-needed funds for conservation activities for the shared U.S.-Russian polar bear population. There will be detractors today, as there were in 1994, who are opposed to amending the MMPA to allow the importation of polar bears trophies from Canada, referring to the language as a loophole. I've seen the ads. I think they're terribly misleading and, in fact, dishonest. In 1970, many marine mammal populations faced numerous threats. The MMPA was very effective in restoring those many marine mammal populations to healthy or historic levels. Unfortunately, the Act does not discriminate between healthy marine mammal populations and those still in need of rebuilding. Robust populations of marine mammals are treated like they are on the verge of extinction. While the 1994 amendments did not address this issue, the Democrat-controlled Congress, specifically those enlightened members of the Merchant Marine Fisheries Committee, had the foresight to understand that sustainable use of resources and conservation activities were not mutually exclusive. The committee developed strict requirements to ensure the protection of the polar bear populations in Canada, while allowing for the importation of sport-hunted polar bear trophies. The idea of incentives to give value to natural resources was very new at the time. A similar program was developed for African communities to protect big game resources in Africa using the same incentive structure. These programs have proven their worth and have been very successful. There will always be a sector of our population that believes we should not kill animals. However, we need to keep in mind that there are still areas in the world that rely on natural resources around them and still subsist on these resources. Some may like to believe that U.S. hunters are prohibited from importing their trophies and the U.S. polar bear hunting will end. This is far from the truth. In addition, it is important to remember that these polar bear sport hunts in Canada support small, remote native villages in Canada. Hunters pay up to $50,000 for a hunt itself and will leave with only the hide of the bear. The native village benefits again from the hunt by retaining all the meat and the monetary gain is taken. Most of the Canadian polar bear populations are healthy and well managed. Sport hunting activities provide important incentives and support remote native villages and important conservation programs in Canada, the U.S., and Russia. Finally, let me again be clear. There's no conservation value in a dead bear that's held in cold storage in Canada for over a year. Those who legally hunted and harvested these polar bears fully complied with U.S. and Canadian laws in place at the time. In most instances, these hunts were years in planning, and savings were set aside to book this once-in-a-lifetime experience. You will hear today from one of our witnesses, Major Roger Oster of Vail, Arizona. Major Oster is a veteran, not one but 10 military deployments during his Air Force career. During his distinguished service, the Major time again and risked his life for the security of this nation. He's now asking this subcommittee for the right to import his legally obtained polar bear trophy into the U.S. It seems to me that at least we can do for this hero warrior who has sacrificed so much for his country, we ought to be allowed to bring his trophy in. Madam Chairman, I have a number of letters from those hunters affected by the May 15 listings who are now who have their polar bear trophies in Canada, and I'm requesting action on H.R. 1054 to allow them to import their property. I ask unanimous consent to submit these letters at the hearing and any additional letters I receive prior to the hearing record close. Thank you, Madam Chairman, for having this hearing. Mr. Gould, in your testimony, you state the administration does not oppose this legislation to allow those hunters that applied for a permit to import their trophies. But you go on to say the administration does not support 1054 as currently written. What changes need to be made for the bill for the administration to support the passage?
We'd like to work with the subcommittee to specifically get language that does not lead to a person that took a bear without that had not applied for a permit to be included in those list of folks that would receive their trophies. That's the only issue.
Mr. Gould, I thought my bill did that. If it did not, though, you can provide the language correctly that would only allow the 41 that had applied for a permit and yet were disallowed to import them. That's what you're saying.
Yes, sir.
Well, I'm sure the chairman would work with you also. That's what I'm my interest in. Mr. Gould, again, if it were not for the court order, which required an immediate effective date, it goes back to the lawyers. I don't like lawyers. I want you to know that. How long would the Fish and Wildlife Service have given the hunters who legally hunted a polar bear prior to May 15 and applied for a permit to bring in their trophies?
Normally, we don't. We allow 30 to 60 days grace period before an effective action goes in under the ESA goes into effect when we make a listing decision. The final decision is made. In this case, as been indicated, the court ordered the immediate effect of the action on May 15th. So therefore, there was no grace period.
I appreciate that. Mr. Markian, does your organization support hunting prior to May 15th ESA listing?
Excuse me, sir?
Did you support hunting prior to the May 15 ESA listing?
Congressman, I think you know our position on
you don't support hunting?
We did not support the hunting of polar bears in the Arctic.
Do you support any hunting?
We're not against all hunting. We're against inhumane.
Which hunting do you support?
We're not against
which hunting do you support?
Hunting in your state of Alaska, we have no problem with. We don't focus on hunting issues generally. We focus on inhumane and unsporting practices, and every bill we've ever supported dealt with practices that we believe.
The answer is you don't support hunting.
We're the Humane Society. We don't encourage people to hunt for fun, but we don't work on those practices.
Osterdahl, you had 10 tours of duty. How did you find time to participate in this bear hunt? Were you retired?
No, Congressman. I was a member of the Air Force's Combat Search and Rescue Community, and CSAR, as it's called, is a low-density, high-demand career in the Air Force. There's very few of us, but anywhere there's American troops in harm's way, we were required to be there. Because we're spread so thin, our tours of duty are generally a lot shorter than most. Where the Army goes for 18 months or 15 months, we go for normally 4 to 5 months.
Okay. How long did it take you to acquire your polar bear tag for the native village?
I started the process in January of 2007, and I went on the hunt the following year, right before.
Took you about a year.
Yes.
Okay, good. And Doctor, one of the things I'm interested is I mentioned in my opening statement 20,000 bears in the year 2000. 1970, and now 23,000. What do you attribute to the growth in the polar bear population? You.
The
the careful management that range states have undertaken over the last 20, 30, 40 years has resulted in the increase in numbers. It's that sort of careful management and establishment of quotas, recognizing the sustainable use both by the local communities and by the hunters to ensure that these populations are as well managed as they possibly can.
Now, if I may, wait, Matt, I don't have much time left, but I live, and I have actually one of the few people ever killed a polar bear in this room, 1964. But what we have found is that if we have a value on the polar bear boar, the polar bear sow and cubs are not taken for subsistence because there's a value of the boar. That serves two purposes. It not only protects the sow and the cubs from human consumption, it also protects them from the boar itself, because the boar will try to kill the cubs so that the sow goes into heat and they can have another cub. So actually the population has increased, about 3,000 bears in Canada over where it was prior to this instigation of this management principle. That's just a little bit of information. I'm sure you're aware of it.
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My time is up.